Всем привет, это проект Альфа.
Hello everybody, this is Project Alpha. My name is Nikolai Feldman, and you're watching War Diary with Alexey Arestovich, who just joined us. Good evening. Good evening. I do want to start with Pokrovsk because the destiny of that town is of concern for the whole Ukraine, specifically the ones who live there. I apologize for the extra noise. So let's perhaps start with the map. All right, we have two groups of contradictory statements, one from Syrsky. Commander-in-Chief said that the enemy has not moved even for a yard in the last couple of days, and it was followed by a bunch of commentary from the localities stating that the enemy actually is moving. But as it turned out later, that it mostly is pertaining to the southern flank, towards Ukrainsk and Kurachovka, and their task is to encircle our troops here in this cul-de-sac. And many soldiers, officers, and people raised the question whether the command understands that situation and whether we'll have enough time to withdraw our troops to save them. This is one of the questions about Pokrovsk. Then, of course, the matter is the main motion towards Pokrovsk. And we can look at these arrows. Usually they're representing correct actions on the front, but even though there are some arrows currently being present there, if you look at the distances and all, indeed it slowed down. And we are seeing the 12th Regiment of the National Guard, Azov, and the 93rd Brigade. Those are the well-known ones. They actually supposedly already went into some counter-attacking actions. We cannot say that the threat to Pokrovsk is removed. We cannot state that, but it seems that we indeed slowed down the enemy. The rest depends upon how much reserves shall our command drop on this part of the front, how effective we'll be at using them, and if we follow that statement and all that data with emotions, we can say that probably Gornyak and Kurachovka is the most important area right now. To Pokrovsk itself, Pokrovsk is still far away. It's not exactly in the immediate threat. And unfortunately, we have no idea how it will unfold overall. We don't know the exact number of enemy troops in this area, and we don't have details about their ideation. We can only follow with the logic of the front. About this encirclement, Alexei, does it make sense for us to stay there? Does it have any tactical value? Well, the overall opinion is staying in encirclement is not a good story, and we should not be giving our enemy these presents. However, there are always times when it makes sense to use that situation on the front, because what it does, it creates additional issues for the enemy, who needs to throw more troops to finish the encirclement, and in the meantime you can drop more reserves, you can hold them longer, and you can waste their resources while they're trying to achieve that goal. The main task in this configuration is to leave that area in time. See that river, Vovcha, that goes north to south? If the crossings across this river are destroyed, then withdrawal will be much more complicated, and that's what our enemies are trying to do. And our command has dealt with encirclements in this war before, so it's interesting to see how they will deal with this one again. We can only outline that the main task for us is to make sure that the troops that are fighting there should not get in a full encirclement, and make sure that we do not leave them there, do not leave the equipment and armor there, because under certain circumstances we may have to withdraw in such a fashion that we'll have to leave the equipment, which is very undesirable. All right, Alexei. So, military propaganda of Russian Federation is positioning everything that's happening on the front, specifically from the side of Ukraine, and they started discussing this live. They're saying that this is not panic, this is actually a certain ideation, and they're cunning, and Ukraine is smarter than us because they are taking over the Kursk district while we are figuring out Pokrovsk. So what do you say about this? Do you think this is the right angle for us? How much should we believe all that communication? I think, Nikolai, we should pose the question wider about the tone, how we represent this war. And that was an active discussion for the last couple of years already, and I think historians will be arguing for 20 more years to come. What does the enemy say? What does our command say? What do bloggers on both sides of the front say? We tried different approaches, right? I tried too, personally. One of them was very optimistic, to fine-tune everybody to win. Then the second approach I tried was complete and utter criticism of everything that Zelensky was doing. And then I'm trying the third one, where we trying to be more balanced when we praise for the good and criticize for the mistakes. So somewhat a moderate position. And here there are different opinions. Who is the addressee? Who is the recipient of the message? What is the audience? Smart people, they praise the critique, but there are very few of them. The crowd, even the abstract crowd, we're not defining it. The crowd wants optimism and wants to giggle and wants to have a laughter at the expense of the opponent. And the main question I get from the crowd is, why did you stop supporting us? Why did you stop your initial style? And then there is a different question. There are different political quarters, where opposition wants to present the government as asshole and people are heroically fighting for freedom, right? So that'd be Poroshenko and this group. Those who support Zelensky, they would like to present everything, that this is a wise, smart plan, and if there are certain deficiencies, it's not the time to talk about them, and they suggest to discuss it as the dead person, either good or nothing, right? And I always wanted to ask people who are fighting when they're putting this meter for everything they hear, that do they understand that this is the way you talk about the dead person? Is that what you want to talk about Ukraine? Is that how you want to do it? And then the third one, of course, is the brutally political use of information to fight for power. And not only by, let's say, some people in opposition who declare that they may want to join the power and to perhaps become the president of the country, but even if it is two people who have zero subscribers, who have zero audience following them, if they are engaged in discussion, they use information in the way they want to, regardless of the clout. And it depends upon your vision, upon your goal. Now, let's look at the Russian side of this. They present that information in front of the Russian audience in a well-edited TV stream where they have to say something, right? And these are the messages that they're saying. They're saying that the enemy is cunning. We should not be underestimating the Ukrainians, that they are funny. They are not. They're not silly, not funny. They're saying that the fight is not simple, that there is NATO equipment on the front, America is cunning, and they're devising all kinds of schemes against Russia. And at the end, you always hear that we always have surprises, and these surprises will eventually reach them, and we will prevail. So this is very well edited and thought out system of communication that shows that indeed it is not easy. Yes, indeed we in Russia in this case, have some drawbacks and failures on the front, but Russia is still holding the hand on the pulse. Russian command is aware and is preparing for all eventualities. So overall message of that broadcast is that the war is difficult. It's hard to fight it, but overall, in general, Russia will prevail. Because these are people who are affiliated with power directly. These are the only people who have access to media in Russia. The real opposition has no place in the media sphere over there. Some of the military correspondents can afford themselves to blame the government a little, but this kind of blame is accepted. Like Prigozhin back in the day was blaming the commander-in-chief, was blaming the generals. They were actually, his troops were shooting at the pictures of the generals. But this is part of the game there. They allow some moderate critique, and since they already have arrested about 80 different military high-position officers, from deputies of the commander-in-chief, it shows that they do have some issues. They have issues with logistics, they have issues with bribery and other issues. So they do have a group that is allowed to criticize these layers of command, but one should keep in mind that there is no free space in Russia. There is no free media space for critique in Russia. All media in Russia right now is It's weaponized for the sake of current power. So everybody can pick and choose what to listen and what to believe. So, for example, our Kursk operation, Arestovich here is saying that it is like Svetoslav history. We are leaving traces in our history that we can be active, we can be daring. Then there is another group saying, what, we quarreled now with our allies, we're violating existing agreements, we don't know how Russia will react to that, this is horror and nightmare, can we even afford ourselves to behave this way? And nobody knows who is fully right. This is the main characteristic of war. Why is it difficult to hold the line during war? Because nobody knows to the end, to the full extent, and the cost of these decisions and the quality of the decisions until the war is done, until the results are fixed somewhere in some format. That's why people often prefer the most comfortable positions. The majority of people gravitate to a certain view, and I wouldn't say here that most of them don't even think like this, but they're saying that don't care. If the war goes for 200 years, I'll be saying for 200 years that we will prevail, the enemy will be defeated, but it'll be Paraguay option. Don't care. You'll have 2/3 of population dead. Don't care. No electricity. Don't care. We need to prevail. We need to finish the Russians. In Russia, they have the same thing. Don't care about rational reasons. Let's fight till the end. Holy Russia, we prevail. We win over West, NATO, and everybody. And majority of people feel very comfortable in such position because they relieve them of necessity to think, to doubt, to calculate, to strategize. And you're always right. That's why it's easy to be a stubborn patriot. While you guys were wavering and thinking and concerning and not sure and calling upon everybody to negotiate, we've been fighting for the victory till the end. Well, what was the price of your fight? Don't care. What was important is that we were standing. And I know people who think like this and who are actually standing on the front, who are holding, but there are very few of them. There are not too many. Those actually support their words with actions. For many people, it's just a position. And then there is another position that other people gravitate to, is absolutely nihilistic. Everything is bad, everything is horrible, let's surrender, we'll never prevail. The most tedious and the most difficult position is when you try to explain what is happening. You're trying to build hypotheses, you're trying to build strategy, you try to help your listeners to learn how to think about events. So you have to highlight different aspects, you cannot fit everything in one stream, and you'll be bad for one side, then you'll be bad for the other, then both of them will not like you. This is, of course, entertaining, but some people are saying that this is a wrong position, but every stream that we do with you, Nikolai, we have usually about 1 million views, right? So we'll probably continue with that very thinkless position, the most criticized one, where we try to analyze what is happening, what the probabilities are for different events, and what should we be concerned about. All right, Alexey, in this regard, I think I want to say that those people who are taking a blatantly patriotic thing, they're usually supportive for their own power in the country, right? They're very useful for their power. Of course, yes, they are. But there are also some Nikolai who are even more optimistic than power. Like in Russia, for example, they have even the rightmost group that is saying, oh, the government is wrong, but we need to be strong, we need to continue fighting like this, and we will prevail. In Ukraine, we have the similar group that says Zelensky sucks, Syrsky is also a bad commander, but this is how we should fight and we will win. And of course, these groups also are present. Alexey, do you think there should be a single voice or there should be different voices during the war? Of course, Nikolai, there should be many voices. It's 21st century where everybody can record in their phone everything they want to say. So this is inevitable. I think since the February of 23, many things changed. Before that situation, only specially selected media people could get to the television. And even if they were saying utter idiocy, they had pro-power idiocy. They were doing that on a high level in the media. Today, everything has changed. Today, everybody and their cat can be on a screen and can be telling different opinions there. And the modern day bloggers, they're mostly addressing their audience via emotions, not via reason. That's why very often they have hysteria in their clickbait slogans and their clickbait pictures and the way they present data. They're doing how they're doing it. The power is doing how they are doing it. So it depends upon your tasks. If the blogger has the task to openly discuss something with his audience or her audience, that's one angle. If it is power, they need to show that they're strong, that they're wise, right? We have some issues, but in general, we are working and we will prevail. There'll be consumers for both opinions, and very often there would be the same people. On one mood, one day they'll tune to the blogger, and the other day they turn to the power. So you can just trace that with the number of views, the degree of communication, so you can see who is more successful and who's doing what. You can trace that by the number of views as the result. All right, let's go back to the Kursk district. We will keep holding Kursk district until we force Putin to the negotiation table. That's what was stated by President Zelensky. It actually, I think, addresses what you mentioned 2 streams ago, that it's time to make a decision about Kursk district, whether to withdraw from there or stay there. But it seems like we are going to stay if we are to believe our president's statement. Do you think this is the right decision? Nikolai, there is no such a thing as the right and wrong decision. Very rarely you have a luxury of seeing things so clearly. We can say that if we do not withdraw troops from the encirclement, that would probably be wrong, right? But if we leave them there. But it's difficult to say what's better about Kursk district, because it depends how they will react. What I think we should post as a question: do we have enough resources to hold this district? Do we have enough capabilities to do it? If we do, we have a decision, we have made decision to hold, and we have resource, fantastic. Some people are saying that Russia already aggregated 60,000 in that direction. It's about a tenth of all the forces that they have in Ukraine. So this is a very solid group. And according to the reports of our troops from the front, they're unofficial, real ones. It is very not easy right now for our troops. The enemy, of course, suffers as well, but our data is also revealing the difficulties of the fight. There was a number that Russia has lost 6,000 already in the district, but we're yet to see our numbers. And we're saying that if Russia indeed would aggregate all the troops to take care of Kursk district, they can, because they still have advantage overall on the hot part of the front, and they have deeper reserves than we are. So we are at the get-go in the unfair positions. We'll be holding it for as long as we can. But on the other hand, that situation could be on any part of the front, right? If we're holding any other part of the front, we can hold Kursk district as well. The main question is not about holding the district, but in actually being able to accumulate more reserves and to use them more effectively. This is the most important feature of that war. Because in the war of that scale, no individual bright operation can solve everything. It is not the first Chechen war when capture of Grozny, the operation carried out in '96, forced Russia to sit down and sign the Khasavyurt agreements, where one action changed the whole situation. Here, this is a lengthy front, a slow, gradual increase and accumulation of losses, and only that, as the cumulative result, will lead to some cumulative conclusion of this war. And that leads us to creating, using, and being effective on the front with reserves. We are at the disadvantageous position from the beginning, so we need to be more effective than Russia in dealing with our reserves. And every operation like Kursk, we need to be more effective. And here, we've talked about that a lot of times ad nauseum, about different deficiencies that we have, trying to highlight mistakes that we're making in order to hopefully fix it, and why the system is not addressing them. All right, let's get to the deficiencies a bit later. Let's address the Zelensky's desire to force Putin to the negotiation table. There was a publication recently in Foreign Affairs which was stating that there is only one option to stop the war in Ukraine on the conditions that are acceptable for the West and Kiev, and that option is to wait. The author of this publication is saying that There are no other options, that Putin will never negotiate for any conditions that are acceptable for Kiev and Washington. And the only way to prevail is to wait till he resigns, dies, or somebody topples him in the internal coup. In your opinion, these statements, how accurate are they? Well, Nikolai, the life itself disproves these statements. Look at the number of statements in the recent 3 days about negotiations. Scholz, India is sending delegation to Putin on the 10th and 11th, should be there. Xi Jinping is making a statement that it's time to discuss peace. Lavrov on the Russian side is coming out and with a statement that they never wanted territorial acquisitions, that they wanted certain achievements at the negotiation table. So this is a phase, this is a third preparatory phase for the negotiations that are going to happen in November, December, in my opinion. And since the second phase was disrupted by Kursk operation, the system rebalanced itself, and now both sides are exchanging opinions that the second stage has passed, and they're working on the third stage. Another bigger proof of this eventuality, of this trend, is that President Zelensky announced the Crimea platform meeting on the 11th. This is another proof that Ukraine is enforcing its negotiation position. And he made a statement on the second peace summit that Russia needs to be present on the third. So all these statements have left behind the opinion of foreign affairs, highlighting that negotiations are upon us, they will happen, and we are in the third phase, in the third preparatory phase to these negotiations. The only thing that I think here is that whether Ukraine perhaps will do another curious surprise, because it seems so that the moment we are going to a negotiating trend, we create another surprise. And let's see what happens. Yeah, that's peculiar, but speaking of the only possible version as to wait for Putin to disappear in some fashion, in my opinion, this is not too impossible. Because disrupting negotiations, you can only run for so long. You can play a game that perhaps you're going for negotiations, but then you disrupt them at the end. That's another game, right? Well, Nikolai, those people who want us to negotiate, they have very strong levers to affect the process. For example, China already problematized even yuan payments with Russia, and Russian economy or Russian economists already sweating about it. And the economy, I think, as well, looking at the numbers, looking at the trades in the Moscow exchange and the rest. As for us, it's even easier with Ukraine. All the military and financial aid are critical issues for us, and it's very easy to enforce us to certain terms by affecting these flows, because we have very little capabilities without external help. That's why both sides can be influenced. They're not defining, but very heavy, very influencing. Of course, we still have an opportunity to create another surprise on the front, to demand more attention, to demand better position, but sooner or later you'll run out of the runway, and negotiations will have to happen. And now both sides are already accepting that in the public. And we'll see what negotiations end with. It's difficult to predict right now, but definitely both sides will be insisting that negotiations need to be successful. And successful in this regard means the end of hot phase of the war and some agreements about the future. I had Peter Kuipa in my streams earlier today, and he said that Putin is like a vehicle that sped up to 600 kilometers an hour, and for him to push the brake means to fly through the windshield because the inertia is so fast, it's so big. I don't think it's true, Nikolai, because he is controlling the opinion of public in Russia, he is controlling the army, and you can see that by how the acting army that actually usually gains support by the country, how much it is torn apart by the FSB investigators. deputy ministers of defense, division commanders, army commanders. They have 6 or 7 commanders of armies under investigation, how all they follow rank and file and to be investigated. So he seems to have high control of Russian Federation, and if he needs to, he would be able to stop the war and even explain them why did it happen. They have a rather controlled situation there, and the hope that Russia will decolonize itself or self-implode or explode or something, no, I think it's wrong. This week, Alexey, Victoria Nuland gave another interview. She is an ex-ranking bureaucrat of Department of State, and she was talking about how Ukraine left Istanbul agreements. She was denouncing the position that Johnson affected this from Kiev. She said that Russia demanded that Ukraine would not be allowed to have certain weapon systems. There were no counter requests from Ukraine, and Istanbul agreements, according to her, did not even imply Russian troops' withdrawal from the border with Ukraine. It forbade Ukraine from having some, as I mentioned, military systems and weapons. So Ukraine would be weakened, and Russia was not being weakened by those agreements. Russia was not pushed away from the border. They were not prohibited to hold any kinds of weapons close to border. And Ukrainian delegation started asking questions whether this deal is good, and that's why this deal fell through. And she thinks that many people, including Zelensky, were suspecting that they may be found in a trap set by Putin. If he managed to get castrated and demilitarized Ukraine, why would he refuse from those agreements, according to Nuland? What do you think? I don't know who prepared that information for her, Nikolai. Moreover, I was the first time leading that military group in these negotiations. So trust me, I know as nobody else who was happening there. There indeed was communication about diminishing the number of troops in Ukraine and limiting us in long-range missiles. But first, we were not agreeing to that. And at the last moment, we had only 2 things not regulated: the number of troops that we are to have after the war. And President Zelensky said that he will decide upon that with Putin one-on-one. And negotiations continued even after Johnson's visit, after Bucha, up until May 17th, when officially we said that we are withdrawing from it, when our side stated that. Russians made these statements several times, but this was the element of pressure when we left it on the 17th of May. So a month and a half after Bucha and Johnson visit, we were still continuing negotiations. The main point of disagreement, of contention, was that systems of guarantees should have been presented by all countries members of United Nations Security Council, and Russia demanded the right of veto for these guarantees. So if, let's say, some third party, not even Russia, attacks Ukraine, Russia wanted to have the veto right for the guarantees of security. And that would mean a total loss for Ukraine, because that would preserve Russian opportunity to attack us without us having a chance to be supported by anybody else. As for the military group, we generally had different opinions, different options about creating the buffer zone, and we demanded Russia to participate in that buffer zone and withdraw the troops 400 kilometers from the border with Ukraine. And crossing this line would be the reason to gather the guarantors to investigate why and what is happening there. So we were, I'm sorry, defending our national interests there, and military question remained in purview of president. We have not achieved final agreements on it, unlike other groups. But the main obstacle was Russian desire to have the right of veto at the UN Council. So basically both sides were working, but the final word was left for a personal meeting between Zelensky and Putin, right? Yes, correct. So why did that meeting never happen? Don't know. It should have happened on the 9th of April. That's where the 2 or 3 weeks were birthed from, because that was about 2 or 3 weeks before the negotiations. And it was implying a personal negotiation between Putin and Zelensky. There they would have addressed Bucha and other questions. And According to David Arachamia, Johnson was exerting some influence on this, but Johnson was pranked by Russian pranksters. What did he say in that call? He said that we did not allow Ukraine because we need to fight with Putin and win. So that was not, however, a defining solution, because even after his statement, even after his influence, the negotiations continued for a month and a half. That perhaps influenced the meeting at the highest level. However, it was still being worked. And there were two obstacles. We could not go for certain conditions that it definitely would have weakened our position. And she's wrong in some details, but as a general message, she is correct. If we would have signed these agreements, they would have been limiting our capabilities. So only two things that were remaining: arms that Ukraine is to have after this war, and Russian right of veto. And since there was no motion forward on these two obstacles, that's, I think, why the negotiations fell through. These two stones were uncircumventable. The delegations could not have resolved them at this moment. And that's it. So in your view, these positions that you guys could not negotiate, how important were they? Oh, they were very important. But the thing is that if there would be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin and they would have tried to negotiate that somehow, then we would have different options, a bouquet of different options that could be used. But since that meeting has never happened, there is nothing to really talk about, because delegations of preparatory groups have failed to negotiate all the obstacles, and then the presidents have never met. What would have happened if they met in person or found some ways to compromise or found common language? We don't know. Presidents usually go and meet each other when 99% of the agreement is already pre-coordinated. And why did that meeting not happen? That's an interesting question, and that's not a question to me. All right, speaking of Johnson, whom you remembered, he made a number of different statements saying that he would wanted to become a military commander if he had a military education, and he was a gifted supporter of Ukraine, and he was inspired to perhaps even go to Ukraine and lead the Foreign Legion there if he was a general. He also expressed his opinion that Ukrainian armed forces have yet to mobilize the younger group of their citizenry. And what do you think about these statements from him about the youth being mobilized, the younger adults being mobilized to war? Do you think this is the signal? Well, I don't think our government will be using his opinion in directing its decisions, because he is a fan of very extreme opinions. He's the one who said, I really respect Russian culture and I really like Ukraine. So he is a very eccentric politician, and in a good old British style likes to present it this way. But Zelensky, as the supreme commander-in-chief and also political leadership of Ukraine, is not using Johnson's statements as guidelines. And as any politicians, they are looking, first of all, at the internal political things, and then only at the external. That's why there's a saying that external politics is always a continuation or extension of the internal. And this is a very unpopular position, so it will problematize Zelensky's election chances if we will drop down the conscription age. So Zelensky is seriously aware of that. From the military point of view, we understand that it's important to lower it, because it will definitely make our infantry more mobile, make it more capable if we have it younger. For now, we have the threshold at 25, but if Russians will go for additional mobilization, we will have to bring the threshold down, because there are limits to our resources and we need to do something. And after certain milestones, this will have to be done regardless whether we want it or not. So looking at the opinions expressed within Ukraine that are still very unpopular, but they're being expressed regardless, maybe only in military logic, maybe as feelers for public opinion. But Dmitry Korchinsky, a rather well-known person for both of us, said that Ukraine perhaps should close the borders even for letting women and children go. And this is what is being discussed by many for the second day already. In your view, this measure Is it important for the country? And how Dmitry Korchinsky can express the opinion that may be a mission for the office of the president. Well, let's not accuse him of working for Zelensky's office until he's caught red-handed. He can express a very independent position. Trust me, who's been in his immediate vicinity for 10 years. I know who he is, but he was always characterized by very, or rather, extreme statements, and this is one of those. It doesn't add anything to his long and controversial path. I would not put too much weight into the statement, but I also would not completely neglect it. I would not say that our enemies would be using it, that this is fascism, etc. No, I would say a different thing here. I happened to be privy to one trend on LinkedIn, where the directors of different Ukrainian companies and organizations were discussing where can they hire young specialists, specifically with engineering degrees. And there was an interesting story brought up there that this year, out of the 17-year-olds who graduated schools in Ukraine, out of 17 kids in one class, only 2 remained in Ukraine and went to study in Ukraine. The rest have left. So we have about 11% people who are patriotic, who are ready to remain and to work and continue working in Ukraine. Or perhaps these 2 were not patriots too, they just didn't have an opportunity to study abroad. If the youth is leaving and the overall mood is that we need to go from the country, then however you lock the borders, people will find ways through it. And if they won't be able to leave, then they'll basically resort to Italian boycotting the decisions of government one way or another. So when the overwhelming majority wants to leave Ukraine and to not be here, and unfortunately this seems to be true, of course there are some patriots who are ready to fight till the last soldier and to the last baby, but Dmitry Korchinsky expressed the point of view of that group of people. But there are not too many of them. The majority are not supporting the economic, humanitarian, and let's put it wide, inner politics of Ukraine. And they're voting with feet. 400,000 people, according to official data, has left Ukraine. Till the end of the year, we probably will hit 600,000. Especially facing difficult autumn, difficult winter, people continue to leave. They vote with their feet. And not many of them run from war specifically. Many of them leave because of the inner politics, about the way the government treats them. After the war, if they all come back or if they vote from abroad, they will be voting for a different Ukraine, different from those who are screaming that we need to stay and fight till the end. And based upon their opinion, we will have a parliament that will define the political configuration and future of Ukraine. And that's it. That's why I think here it's very simple. There are always people who express their fringe opinions, but major politics are done in the interests of majority. The way it is being done now is pushing majority away from Ukraine and from the power. And it's sowing big concerns about the future of Ukraine. And Korchinsky is a diminishing value for most people in Ukraine who don't even know who he is. But who is President Zelensky and his people around him, Getmantsev and the like, people feel it on their skin and they vote with their feet. That's why I made a post a while ago when Cabinet of Ministers was declaring their changes and replacement. I said that we should not be changing politicians, but we should be changing politics. And that's when maybe people will start voting with feet in a different direction. Because for now, it all leads to exile, to people leaving the country, to isolation. And you cannot continually try to convince hungry people that they're fed. They'll just go mad eventually. Strugatsky brothers had said that in their Inhabited Island book that I recently did the voiceover for. So it's rather simple here, I think. Regardless of how high you pull your patriotic pants and what kind of brave statements you're going to make will not help you to change the opinion of the majority of the country who do not appreciate this politics and who are trying to leave and flee from it. You can take any laws that you like. You can even catch somebody and send him to the front to fight for the country. But he puts the gun down and says, I won't. You can court-martial me if you like. Right, Alexey. Here the question is that politics is so contradictory that it's difficult to understand all aspects of it. If on one hand, president is asking Ukrainians to come back and creating a certain ministry that will be in charge of returning Ukrainians back. Yeah, we apparently do have some Ukrainians who do want to come back. Oh, I can show you one Ukrainian who wants to come back, right? Right here. Right, and you're not the only one, Alexey, if I'm revealing any secret here. And yes, at the beginning of war, they left the country, but they would like to come back. But they're really concerned about returning, because when you're coming back to this country with children, you don't know how the system will work for you or against you, and whether there is even a law and legal system in this country. Is it even functioning? Because when we see that military commissars being detained with millions of dollars in their vehicles, that draws one color of the paint. And we also have people who have many children and who still fall under attempts to be drafted despite of the legal protection that they have. So I think one can pose the question whether Zelensky really wants people to come back, or whether he just wants to make contradictory statements by himself and with the help of different politicians. Because with all that, people would just not be bringing their kids back home. Right. We can also review the recent scandals with the drafting committee and lack of adequate legal protection. Nikolai, for example, even for me, when I'm not a usual civilian member of our society, even I am not guaranteed any legal protections in the country. And that's not even the point. The point is wider, I think. What is our economic politics at large? Because we have some interesting stats. For example, 9 million people, so out of 25 million people present in Ukraine, 9 million are working. 14 million are elderly and school kids and students. 9 million are those people who can hold maybe 3 to 4 territories. And this population just is technically not capable of serving the pre-war territory of Ukraine, just physically not capable to provide enough army. Because what is 9 million workers? That's the country the size of Hungary, maybe a little more than Hungary. We already would not be able to hold the borders of 91, and probably not the ones that we even have now. So unless we find a lot of people somewhere, we would not be able to hold these borders economically, and that implies the change of the format of our country. Now, okay, let's take that it did change already. It's in the process of change. Where are we going then? Our economic policies vector in the last 33 years was to listen to International Monetary Fund, IMF, to turn Ukraine into the country that is dominating in agriculture and is also providing some IT services. There was a vector to totally deindustrialized country. And then apparently we figured out that the country that is deindustrialized and doesn't have enough energy capabilities, it doesn't sustain itself, it cannot sustain well enough equipped army, and cannot sustain military-industrial complex that would be able to enable our security. So apparently this vector was wrong or false for us. And now we do hope that political party in power, political group, would understand the falsities of these vectors, and perhaps we are going to choose something else. But unfortunately, this is not what's happening. We have all the steamy statements about us prevailing here and there on the front, about the drones, Ukrainian drones attacking Russians effectively. But okay, all good. But what about economy? Is there economic platform behind it? No, we don't have one, and people are not believing blatant statements. So we're missing the articulated goals for the country. What do we want from ourselves in light of what the world wants from us? And then there are a lot of tactical elements to that. Deaths in the drafting commission while they're performing their functions, economic issues, people leaving the country. This is outlining the economic hopelessness. because the Second Ukrainian Republic will likely die from immorality or anti-morality, I think, because it stems from the absence of general goals, general course. Ethics becomes the guiding contour only when there are fundamentally agreed upon big goals for the country. And we don't have goals and we don't have agreement. People do not believe in perspective. Roughly speaking, there is no reason to live here for. Right, and there is no personal ethics too that's lacking. Exactly, Nikolai. That was a military commissar from Bucha, by the way, who aggregated $1.2 million and hid it in the walls of the building. This is the commissar in Bucha, which became the symbol of this war, of the atrocities of occupants. His morality fared well by gathering this money. And those almost 500 civilian deaths did not stop him from just corrupting the system. So people are fleeing. The fish is looking for deeper areas, and people are looking for areas where they can live better. So Europe, United States, where they can have some legal protection, at least some arguments about perspectives and future. So they at least have some perspectives there. And sorry to interrupt you about that military commissar. I think he was even let out of jail for a bail bond. Do you think he should be out? No, I would not let him out, even for big money, because this is a very heavy crime in the times of war, especially if it is a bureaucrat or a military official who is committing a crime during the times of war. So no bail. But, you know, people understand here, I guess, in Ukraine that even when somebody gets detained, then the legal system works as the sports fishing. Here's the fish, we caught it, take a picture, and we'll let it go. Right, in April, we had a situation when a drunk bureaucrat from one of the districts killed 4 people being drunk in a car, and he recently was let out of jail. Right, this is the easiest way to demoralize the country. Because common citizens, they deal with whom? With police, with recruitment office, with some of the local administration representatives. And looking at all of them, they understand that they're just taking money from everything, and they're getting bribed left and right, and I cannot do or pursue anything in this country. And in the logic of macroeconomics and global positioning, usual citizens do not think in that logic, but they feel it. And you can see that by the number of births. People don't want to bring children into this world when there is no hope. And when we had some generally good years in around 2000, people were actively giving births in Ukraine. Now they don't, not only because of war, because there is no perspective. And this, I think, is the main tragedy that is being expressed on the micro level with interfacing and drafting commission, and of course with the macro level. Okay, we have a goal to win in this war. We have, imagine. What else? What next? Any taking stock of the results of the previous 30 years and planning for the next 30 years to come? Right. All right, about the numbers of our population and total or not total mobilization and preparation of reserves in Ukraine, there was a publication by Alexey, Ukrainian economist. He was comparing Ukrainian mobilization potential with Israeli mobilization potential. And this is what he noticed. A peculiar observation when do we take Israel to compare with Ukraine. Active army, 170,000 plus 470,000 in reserve. Jointly over 600,000 people for 10 million population. If you take the maximum potential at 10%, of population, you get about 1 million, which is definitely higher from the current tempo of recruitment in the country. So Israel, having relatively small population, is not even scraping the top of the recruitment level, perhaps due to technologies that allow them to be stronger than their current enemies, and also be stronger than Iran overall forces and Iran-funded forces that are supported by 190 million people, while they only have about 10 million living in Israel. What do you think about it? Well, this is one of the myths about Israel that is absolutely incongruent with reality. This one is actually completely in opposition to it. The Israel's secret is that they figured out how to recruit people. When somebody jokes that they have a lot of technology, no, not so. They do, but that's not the key. The key is that Israel figured out how to bring more people to the battlefront. Let's say bigger than those 3 Arab armies that were fighting them during the times of that war. And then that's the first element. The second is, of course, being brave and using the technology. Number 1 is quantity. As Stalin, by the way, said back in the day, he was saying that quantity is by itself a quality. And of course, quantity matters. And what we should learn from Israel, not the technologies that they have, but the system of mobilization that allows them to recruit with a high precision and quality a lot of people. This is their major know-how. They had more enemies, of course, but they figured a way to bring more people to the front than their enemies. And that's what we need to learn. So the question is stated correctly, but I wanted to correct the illusion about technological advantage of Israel. It is not about the technological advantage, just because they can bring more troops to the given front. And that's what was the key factor for them to win. So it appears that all these calculations, Alexey, then are not adequately estimating the reserves, because reserve is probably a formal number, but the number of reservists is probably half the country, right? Okay, Nikolai, so I'll repeat it again. They have a system that allows them, for a certain operation or a certain war, to call upon more people than all their enemies combined. This is their main know-how. As for numbers, you can qualify and argue about different things. The army is not 170, but 115,000 during peace times, but this is nuance. Plus, it also fluctuates, it grows, it shrinks, depends upon when the data was taken. So this is not the main factor. The main factor is not technology. It is people who are fighting. At first, you need to make sure you have a lot more people in the army than your enemy, and then you can bring and spice it with technology. Because there were times when Israelis were not really advanced in technology, let's say in 73, when their jets were facing Egyptian air defense systems that were supplied by Soviet Union. They had some grief with all their technology. They didn't know how to fight it. So that's when they lost 50% of their jets. But they were still taking by numbers. And the system needs to be designed in such a fashion that it would provide enough people on the battlefront. Quantity matters. And we have seen that at the beginning of this war. And we have also had a chance to witness what happens if you don't recruit for 7 months. And all of the achievements that Russia did in autumn and early spring, because they had more people than we did. So what did Israel do, unlike others? Well, main factor was women. They also recruit women. That's why they have a lot more military specialties that are fulfilled by women. And there are military detachments, active front detachments with staffed by women. But at first they fill all the support positions. But if you want to, yeah, you can become a commander of tank if you want to, if you're a woman. But basically, since there were more women taking a lot of positions in the army, most men went to the front, went to the actual hot line of fighting. And actually, they have the similar system in Switzerland as Israel. And the system is that you serve for 3 years in the army, and then once for 30 or 45 days, you basically serve as a reservist for a month or a month and a half. Or you can be recruited by an order or a decree of war. That's why the army by itself is relatively small, but all men until 45 or even older, depends upon your specialty, they were brought back to the army during 24 hours or slightly over that. They could have brought hundreds of thousands of people back to the army. And of course, people are training, they're active reservists. Sometimes that system was malfunctioning, like during the Second Lebanon War, but generally it was working very well. And during the War of Judgment Day, which almost ended up being a Judgment Day for Israel, the population of Israel at that time was only about 2 million, vanishingly small. And During 3 days, they brought hundreds of thousands of troops to the front. And that's what helps them to survive. An ability to recruit quickly. Soviet system of recruitment was also allowing the country to draft a lot of people with high speed, but it was dismantled at the end of the Soviet Union. And we have done about 6 waves of mobilization in our country since the beginning of the conflict. Russians have never really done that. They had a contract army. When they started this war, they had 330,000 troops in the invading group, plus additional 150 of Donetsk and Lugansk, so-called republics. And they lost the operation. They failed to fulfill any tasks on the first stage. They left Kiev, Chernihiv, Sumy. They were defeated everywhere. Then they figured what it cost, and they recruited 300,000. And that's when we started having issues. Then we scratched our things and figured out, okay, we need to recruit more. And we brought more people to the front. But then they also figured how to bring additional 30,000 every month to the front by investing more money and paying them bigger money for contractual work. And now they have another issue because they're running out of this resource and they need more people to the front. So they're facing a possible need for a draft. But we're still facing the same conclusion that what matters at war is the size of battalions. We thought for a while that special forces landing from special black helicopters can do a lot of things and change the front. No, in reality, they don't do much. You don't need a handful of tanks costing 25 millions each when you can actually bring a bunch of cheap tanks. And even if you lose some of them to FPV drones, you'll still be able to carry out some tasks. And you need huge numbers of soldiers. And who can bring more to the front is the side that will win and who will use them right. And that's it. It goes back to numbers. And all these technologies, they only start to act as addition after you've solved the first task. And this is the main lesson of Israel. Although, yes, there is a myth that Israel is very high-tech and most high-tech country. Yeah, a factor, but not the most important. They always prevailed because of numbers, and the technology was second. End of first hour.